What's going on, guys? It's Paul here, and this is the Sony A7 IV, which I've had for almost 2 weeks now, and spoiler alert, I'm loving this camera. But I saw a comment recently where someone said that going from the Sony A7S III to the Sony A7 IV would be a downgrade in camera. Now, there are some aspects where that's true, but that's certainly not true across the board. In fact, totally disregarding that the A7 IV is $1,000 cheaper than the A7S III, if I had both camera bodies right here in front of me and I had to choose between one or the other, I would still go with the A7 IV because for me, it's the better camera. So this is not going to be an exhaustive list of the differences between the A7 IV and the S3, but I thought I would do a video and just share with you guys the reasons why I chose the A7 IV, and depending on your shooting style, you might want to as well. Now I'll start with advantages that the A7 IV has over the A7S III, and the first and most obvious is that this camera has a 33 megapixel sensor, whereas the A7S III only has a 12 megapixel sensor. Now that's by design, that's to be expected because the S line has always been more video centric, so it benefits more from those fewer but larger pixels, and the standard A7 line, like the old A7 III, the A7 IV, it's meant to be more of a hybrid camera. Now I consider myself a hybrid shooter because I do shoot both photo and video. However, I would say I shoot about 80 to 90% video and only 10 to 20% photo. With that said, it's not just the photo mode that benefits from this 33 megapixel sensor. You see benefit in video mode as well because the 4K 30 in this camera is oversampled from that 7K image, meaning you get a lot sharper 4K 30 image out of this camera than you do with the A7S III. Another benefit with the A7 IV, albeit a small benefit, but still something that you would not get with the A7S III, and that's that they've added this mode switch on the top so you can really easily switch between photo and video mode and S&Q mode. And I also really like that they've updated the EV dial. They've removed the numbers so that if you do switch it to controlling some other function, it's a little less confusing. And I love that they've added this lock so that you do not bump it by accident. For this next advantage, I will throw out a quick disclaimer because it has to do with firmware. And as of the time of recording this video, this is the only camera in the Sony lineup that has this feature. But because it's firmware, it's possible that at some point in the future, Sony might release a firmware update for the A7S III, the A1, to add this feature to those cameras. So this could change in the future, but just know that as of the time of recording this video, this is the only camera in the Sony lineup that has breathing compensation. If you haven't seen breathing compensation in action yet, it does exactly what it sounds like. It compensates for the breathing. It currently only works with certain Sony lenses. Hopefully they're able to add some third-party lenses to that in the future. But if you have something like this 20mm f1.8G from Sony, you can attach this lens, and then in the menu you can turn on breathing compensation, and as you focus in video mode from something far away to something close up, instead of that little zoom in and out, the camera automatically compensates for that. So those are most of the advantages that the A7 IV has over the A7S III. Now let's talk about some of the reasons why someone might say that switching from the S3 to the A7 IV would be a downgrade in camera, and specifically related to video. Probably the biggest disadvantage has to do with the high frame rate capabilities. So the A7S III is able to record in 4K at 60p with no crop at all, or in 120p with what I think is a 1.1 times image crop. Now the A7 IV, on the other hand, has no 120p, at least not in 4K, and in 60p, it's a 1.5 times crop. For myself, and I know for many of you video shooters out there, this is going to be the biggest pro-con that you're going to have to weigh out when deciding between these two cameras. Now, where I landed on that is that I don't shoot weddings anymore. And if I did, I would definitely have gone with the A7S III because when I was shooting weddings, I was shooting in high frame rate basically all day. Granted, it was 60p at the time and not 120 because we didn't have that back then, but I was using high frame rate all the time. That's not the case anymore since I don't shoot weddings anymore. Most of what I do are videos like this one, vlog style videos, Basically, I'm in 4K 30 99% of the time anyway, so I decided I would rather have a sharper 4K 30 image and just forego that ability to shoot in 4K 120, even though it would be nice to have. The next notable difference between the two cameras is the rolling shutter, which is that jello-y slant that you get if you pan the camera too quickly. And on the A7S III, that effect is pretty minimal. Unfortunately, with the A7 IV, the rolling shutter is still pretty heavy, but like I said earlier, most of what I'm filming these days is a shot like this, so I'm locked down on a tripod, or if I'm getting movements, I'm using a motorized slider, so I'm getting slow, smooth pans anyway, which means that the rolling shutter issue really isn't much of an issue for my shooting style. The last little difference that I'll mention has to do with the low light performance, and specifically the higher ISO performance. So the S line of Sony cameras has always been known to be incredible in low light. The really large pixels with the sensors in that camera line just produces a really clean image even at a very high ISO range. So the A7S III is incredible in low light. When I first heard with the A7 IV that they were going to be jumping all the way up to a 33 megapixel sensor, I was honestly a little bit disappointed because I thought that it meant that this camera would have poor low light performance. So on the day that the camera was announced and Gerald Undone posted his video including a low light test, I was very pleasantly surprised to see that even though it's a 33 megapixel sensor, just with the newer technology in this camera, it still has really good low light performance. Now the A7S III is still better in low light than the A7 IV, so once again, if I were still filming weddings, that would be the camera to go with, because sometimes you have to film in really dark wedding venues for the wedding reception. But because I'm not doing that, the A7 IV has incredible low light performance for any type of videos that I'm shooting these days. So those are my thoughts. Those are the reasons why I chose the A7 IV over the A7S III. You can let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, and I will see you in the next video.